Greetings. The ancient Greeks didn't invent the kind of democracy we have in our nation, nor did philosophers and theologians design it. The wildly untamed and apparently irreverent proto-Protestants did. And what they did in their churches both terrified and inspired political leaders to begin to copy their church government structures. Voilà, civil and political democracy. Now, how do we hold on to it? Well, how did we get it? From the Spirit, the Holy Spirit of God. Ergo, if we as practicing Christians operate as people and churches informed and inspired by the Holy Spirit, we become 21st century models for this disruptive form of governance. For example, more than half of our states and some 29 other nations have some form of the initiative. All but one is a culturally Christian nation. And certainly, when people have initiatives on the ballot, they are disrupting things. Welcome the Spirit. This is the Practicing Christian, and our report this week is on welcoming the Spirit of God. A number of traditional Christian rituals use the phrase, receive the Spirit. This is in reference to the indwelling of God's Spirit within us. We open the gates of our minds and our own human spirits to accept God's Spirit as a forming and influencing voice and power within our lives. But of course, we can also shut those gates. Few do so deliberately. Practicing Christians have no antipathy or resentment towards the Holy Spirit. But we can get into the unfortunate habit of neglecting the Spirit, ignoring Him, sidetracking His wisdom and the strength He can give us. That can happen quite accidentally. We may concentrate on the aspect of God which we think we know best. For instance, God the Father. He has the power to preserve and direct our universe and our world. His providence is all around us. More likely, though, we can be even more caught up in understanding and appreciating God as the Son. Jesus quite rightly is the immediate way in which we connect with God the Father. Perhaps this obscures the special ways in which we make contact with God the Spirit. So it can be a good idea to consciously, in our thoughts, prayers, and conversations with others, welcome the Spirit quite deliberately. This is rather like when you're introducing people in a group. Begin with the quietest person and end with the most noticeable and vocal of them all. I thought of that this week when reading a church leader's statement about how, quote, our commitment to democracy is theological, close quote. I stopped for a moment and reminded myself that theology is basically a human experience. Our way of organizing our understanding of God and God's relation to our world and universe. Now, it may well be that there is also simply our human commitment to democracy, in which we take pride, even as we worry about how democracy will survive to serve in our world these days. We risk losing it because of the fact that we do think of it as our idea, our game. In some respects, it is. Ancient Greek democracy was certainly the political process of the some 30% of Athenian men who were neither women nor slaves. But we don't inherit that democracy. There was no legislature, for example. All the people voted directly on all the measures. It washed away in the ides of history and didn't re-emerge until the very earliest years of the Reformation. They didn't even call it democracy then. The Mennonites, the Waldensians, the Hussites, the Friends, that is the Quakers, and others all understood that in becoming a Christian, the Spirit was within them. They saw the Bible led them to run their affairs by being led by all the people who were baptized, and therefore all had access to the Spirit within them. This is why they wanted to go back to the Bible and only baptize believers. In a world of hierarchies, with the ordinary man being politically small and insignificant, these proto-Protestants were living in successful, democratic communities where the church was run directly by people who welcomed the Spirit and followed God. So they were a danger to inherited or outside power, like that of dukes, of princes, of archbishops, and others. More and more churches came to adopt this Christian democratic way of self-government. Many began also to think that this is how the state should be run. We see just such direct democracy in the New England town meetings. In the middle 1600s, this Christian democratic approach led Massachusetts towns to set up the first public schools anywhere, in part so that all could learn to read the scriptures for themselves. These were radical schools. They accepted girls as well as boys. For us today, we have chosen to enlarge upon those Puritan governing plans, forming a republic made of 50 smaller republics, all with democratic ideals. These New England governments began as spirit-guided and empowered states. Later, all people, not just Christians, were able to vote. So we now have secular republics, born of embryo Christian republics. The Christians within these secular republics of ours, Maryland, Oregon, the USA, all the states, can still seek on their own or as groups, meaning our churches, they can still seek to be Spirit-informed and Spirit-empowered in their own involvement in this secular republic. Given what we can do, God wouldn't want it any other way. He did not raise us up to be shrinking violets, but to be clear voices to the rest of his world. It's interesting to note that a majority of our states and 29 other nations have provisions for the people to directly legislate government through the initiative process. All but one of these nations have Christian cultural backgrounds. The Spirit of God keeps on working. So receive the Spirit when you're thinking or reading or discussing public affairs by yourself, with other believers, or with any motley crowd you find yourself in. Give them the benefit of how a Christian may understand war, cybersecurity, public health, private sexuality, taxation, fiat currency, public education, vouchers to parents, all of it. If anyone points out that not all Christians agree with you, cheerfully agree with him. God inspires and guides us, but we have to filter it all through our imperfect brains. Besides, he leads us to support providing housing for others through Christian means like Habitat for Humanity, and also through public housing. There's more than one way to skin a cat. That's what you can tell them. Another way to look at this is that when people outside of Christ or his church, now look at your church, they expect at some level to notice the work of God being carried on by you. Not just the rituals, but the work of love. And how's that working for your parish these days? Governments long ago began to copy many processes, and works of our Spirit-empowered churches. The irony is that some churches began to copy secular programs that originated with Christian people and principles. But as secular government organizations, these programs leave God out of it, so they lose the source of that clarity and power that God's Spirit provides. We must always be regenerating ourselves and our works of love by the power of the Spirit. Serve then, be the King's right arm,